Please go ahead, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I appreciated your testimony of Facebook Meta and YouTube Google and TikTok as well. And I appreciate that you've brought your foreign interference intelligence experts and that you each have your own designated branch to tackle this growing issue. I also believe you each mentioned how you've been dismantling any reach of tenant media. So I think that's priority number one, and appreciate that you've all taken action on that. Certainly, Conservatives are of the position that any actor that's taking money from a foreign government to undermine the Canadian interest should be held fully accountable. And of course, your platforms have a very strong role in ensuring that is done. Given your technology, you would know even sooner than government, I would imagine, in many circumstances when that's being done. So it sounds like you're being quite proactive. But I would like to understand better what government has done tangibly to assist your platforms. We've heard a lot proclaimed from the current Liberal government that they're taking foreign interference seriously. We can start with Meta. What tangible efforts have been made to assist Facebook, for example, in these efforts to combat foreign interference?
Thank you for that question. And through the chair, we have not had any specific outreach from the Government of Canada on this issue. We do engage with government departments when we think there is information that's relevant and necessary to their mandates. And we do brief them on our work, including work related to foreign interference. And so we have done those briefings for government agencies in the last year or two, but we have not had specific outreach from government departments or government agencies on this issue in the last, I would say, 12 to 24 months.
Thank you. So just to confirm, you have proactively, on your own accord, reached out to brief government. Government in the last 2 years has not reached out or provided any tangible resources in the last 2 years regarding foreign interference. Just confirming that?
That's correct, yes.
It's surprising given Facebook's reach, and of course China, Iran, Russia, and others are trying to utilize your platform. And I'm surprised that no action really has been taken, but thank you for taking initiative. YouTube, do you have anything different or similar to add or otherwise?
Thank you for the question. We do, again, regularly brief government as well as parliamentarians on our efforts, especially as it relates to foreign interference. With respect to some of our internal teams, our threat analysis group, which is a team of experts and security analysts who regularly are both detecting and disrupting foreign campaigns. They would also be the ones to likely, coordinate and discuss these matters directly with law enforcement. But these have been proactive briefings on our account.
Well, so as Ms. Curran had said, you have not received proactive efforts to you from government. It's been you initiating those efforts. Is that correct?
We do provide those briefings proactively, yes.
Oh, thank you. And then there's been attempts by Liberals to make a connection between our party, the Conservative Party, and tenant media. With your reach, are you aware at all if there's any connection between the Conservative Party and tenant media? To Ms. Curran.
Thank you for that question. I'll turn this over to my colleague, David Agranovich. I think he has looked into the issue of whether there is a connection between tenant media and the Conservative Party of Canada and can answer that question directly.
Based on our investigations into tenant media and broader Russian state-controlled media, we do not see evidence that links the Conservative Party of Canada to Tenet or RT. I will say we're very careful when we do the investigations to avoid speculating beyond the evidence we can see on our platforms. And our investigations are focused on the behavior we see on our family of apps. So our investigations, we cabin to the things we can observe and the assessments that we can make based on what we see on our platform.
Thank you very much. Certainly, we're all involved following foreign interference for quite some time, notably foreign interference from China in our elections and their efforts that they've made through social media and other platforms to influence Canadian elections. We all know, as I mentioned, Iran also a popular state actor with foreign interference, and of course Russia is the topic of conversation today. My concern, though, is that all these actors are watching how the Western world reacts to their foreign interference. So, for example, we recently learned in the Globe and Mail and through the foreign interference investigation that a former public safety minister of the Liberal government took 54 days to authorize a surveillance warrant for a Liberal power broker provincially also former Liberal cabinet minister provincially, and they dragged their feet on foreign interference, and we can go on and on. They took 6 years to designate the RGC as a terrorist organization. This perhaps is more towards your intelligence individuals that you've brought. What sort of message does that sort of inaction or reluctance to act, reluctance to take things seriously, what does that send to Russia when they're looking to interfere with misinformation on social media platforms? Is that a strong enough message that we're sending to Russia? So perhaps to Facebook's intelligence officer.
So my role at Facebook is to investigate and disrupt networks that we see on our platform. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to speculate on how governments might perceive other government actions.
Thank you. To YouTube's counterpart.
I have to echo David's comment. I'm an expert on the adversary behavior and cyber adversary behavior. I wouldn't be able to speculate on how the government reacted to something like that.
Very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. We go now to Mr. McDonald for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. I'll quickly, just on Ms. Dancho's recent comments, I wanted to know why that, if there's so much work being done on this, Tenet Media was only taken down after the U.S. indictment. Maybe Meta could speak to that first, please.
I'll turn that over to my colleague, Mr. Agranovich.
I'd be happy to, and thank you for the question. At Meta, maybe just to zoom out a bit about how we handle state media entities, and then when those state media entities start to bleed into covert influence activity, like what you saw with Tenet. Now, for several years now at Meta, we've labeled state-controlled media entities from 10 different countries. And Russian state-controlled media specifically, we put in place additional measures that restricted Russian state-controlled media after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Those measures included things like not just labeling their pages on our platform, but also putting in what we call interstitial friction. So if someone tries to click on a link, for example, to a Россия Сегодня story, they actually get a pop-up window that says, hey, are you sure you want to go visit that? That's Russian state-controlled media. We also labeled posts by any user.
Mr. Agranovich,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have some more questions, and I want to make sure that I get to them because I don't have much time. Mm-hmm. So earlier today, I went in and I went on to...
Well, excuse me. Do you want the answer, or do you want to ask your questions? Mr. Agranovich is the expert in these issues.
Excuse me, guys. We have a problem ici.
I think there's a little technical problem here.
Je vais aller sur floor. Quand je...
Not interrupt. It's hard for, and everybody to not interrupt. It's hard for the interpreters to translate when that happens. So, Mr. McDonald, we'll make allowances for the time. Please carry on.
Ahead of your appearance today, I tried an experiment on my Facebook page. I tried to post an article from the Globe and Mail from September 10th, written by Shannon Carey, entitled Canadian Right-Wing Influence Alleged Dealings with Russian Media Company Took Place Despite Sanctions. After posting, there was a pop-up, which you just mentioned, news, and I have it here, news content can't be shared in Canada. But then I went back and I did it again under after that post failed, I went back into Lauren Southern, that is still on Tenet Media's Rumble page, and I tried how Indian scams will be the end of Canada. And I was able to post that no problem, with no pop-up. So, and I have it here, and you can try it while you're there online if you wish, because it's still there. And it says, got a picture of the Prime Minister with a Canadian flag on one side, an Indian flag on the other, and it says the New India. So you may be working very hard to accomplish perhaps what we heard in all the preambles. But I'm wondering, with the amount of money that Meta is making, 134 billion US, and up from 119 in 2022, like, do we need more legislation surrounding social media platforms through government to be able to do this? Or, like, what are the issues?
Maybe I can address both that question and your first question, which is when we removed Tenet Media, Rossiya Сегодня, kind of that broader Russian state-controlled media entity, the measures we had in place already had reduced engagement with their content by 94%. They had reduced their posting by about 55%. That was before we removed them. We ultimately took the decision to remove them not based on the DOJ indictment, because we think it's important that as a technology company, we aren't simply removing things because the US Department of Justice says that they're bad, but because we actually could see on our platform violations of our policies. Rossiya Сегодня and their subordinate groups violated our policies that prohibited foreign interference in elections. They violated our policy against claiming to engage in foreign interference in our elections. And to your second question, these groups, whether it's Rossiya Сегодня, the clandestine brands that they've created, or influence operators more broadly, are incredibly adversarial actors. What we saw from RT, for example, when we started labeling them, was they began creating hundreds of look-alike domains where they would rehost their content, because what they were trying to do was avoid the interstitial pop-ups that you referenced and avoid the link friction in the labeling by creating domain after domain after domain so that our teams would have to keep chasing them all over the internet, which we certainly will do and continue investing in. But I think it is the nature of this problem set that the adversaries that we and our partners in government and our partners in the tech industry are dealing with are highly motivated to continue to try to do what they're doing, right? They often are operating on behalf of governments. They're not operating out of commercial concern. They're operating to advance a nation state directive. And as a result, our goal is not to eliminate them from the internet entirely, because that's unlikely to ever happen. Our goal is to make it so hard for them to get the reach that they're looking for that they essentially go somewhere else or try to find other avenues for their operations.
Thank you, Mr. Grovanich. Look, I'm not challenging you to some extent, but what I am saying is we're sitting here and we heard the preambles of everything that's taking place. And it's hard when 3 hours ago that I was able to do that and believe everything that is being told to us. I have another question maybe for all of you.
Question?
Mic is turned off. Can members control their own mic? Because
They can, but if the chair has any indication, it's not reliable.
well, this is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess I want to know, social media platforms that are here today, do you share information on the issues that are at hand here today? Like, how much do you communicate with one another when you come across an incident like this? Anybody can answer.
I'm happy to take that first, but would also welcome, I think, my colleagues on this panel are also all part of that information sharing. When we do a takedown of a CIB network, we commit to sharing our findings publicly. So we do that quarterly in our threat reporting. We also share detailed technical indicators with security teams across the industry. And increasingly, we've started doing the indicator sharing publicly. So we created a GitHub repository that any security team, including the ones we may not know the contact information for, can access and find indicators for example, Russian networks across multiple platforms across the internet. We have about 7,000 indicators so far in that network, in that GitHub, and we'll keep
Specifically
adding to it
share
as
with
quarter goes by.
Instagram or TikTok. Like, there's nothing directly that goes directly to them. There's nothing in your policy or regulations.
We do both. So we share directly with other technology companies' security teams when we see operations that target their platforms, and we also share publicly, in part because these operations often target very small companies that may not have a security team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin. Monsieur Fortin.
We'll now go to Mr. Fortin. Mr. Fortin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm going to address my question to Meta, perhaps to Ms. Curran. Meta, in my opinion, has a great deal of influence and over information available in Canada. The internet is something that is evolving quickly, daily, and we've seen that. I'm thinking of another hearing in a different committee, and I won't get into that. But over the past few months, Meta has been disallowing access to certain articles that help Canadians and Quebecers be more informed about issues. It seems that there is a lot of misinformation on Facebook in particular and on other social media as well, but certainly on Facebook, a lot of disinformation, misinformation, and it doesn't seem that Meta is actually acting on that, but is trying to make profit. And if there isn't any profit, then it doesn't matter about democracy and fairness. That's a fairly widespread opinion, and perhaps it's wrong. But I would like to hear from you if you want to set the record straight. But it seems that you're there to make money, and democracy and fair information is not your priority. Is that the case or not?
I think that's incorrect. So listen, I think you're talking about a couple of different issues. The first is removal of news from our platforms. We would love to restore news to Facebook and Instagram. The reason we had to remove it from our platforms is because the current government introduced and passed Bill C-18, the Online News Act, which was going to require us to pay $80 million a year, approximately, for content that had no particular commercial value to us. In fact, we think we provided great value to news publishers. We estimated that in the order of $230 million per year to publishers in distribution value. So publishers in Quebec, we worked with Le Devoir, we worked with La Presse, we worked with publishers in Quebec across the board to distribute their content on Facebook and Instagram and get it to larger audiences. And we think we were very successful in doing that. Now, the current government introduced legislation which gave us no option but to remove news from our platforms, or we were going to have to pay for it. My colleagues at Google are currently still enmeshed with the CRTC in trying to figure out how this scheme is going to work. But we would love to restore news to our platforms. We could do that tomorrow if we were scoped out of C-18, the Online News Act, or if the legislation was repealed, or even if publishers were given the option to opt in or opt out to that legislation. We could restore news content to our platforms tomorrow. And look, as a Canadian, I would love to do that. I would love to see Canadian news back on our platforms. I would love to see news from Quebec back on our platforms. We are unable to do that within the legislative framework of C-18, but I think that can be fixed.
Si je comprends bien, Madame Curran.
If I understand correctly, Ms. Curran, the problem is that it would cost Meta $80 million or $18 million a year. Is that the price that Meta is placing on democracy and accurate information?
No, not at all. In fact, I would argue we still have content on our platform from non-governmental organizations. We still have content from academic institutions. We still have content from regular.
I apologize for
consider credible.
I'm sorry.
Accurate.
Je veux simplement.
I just have a minute left, and I understand your position. I was expecting that answer, but we are dealing with this problem of disinformation from Russian state-controlled authorities, and everyone is concerned here in Canada. But regular people are looking for news, and often it is on social media. I wish it was different, but that's the reality. So I think that Meta has a social responsibility, not just Meta, but all other social media organizations as well. But you have an important, an essential role even to play to allow information to get to the public. We would expect a higher sense of responsibility on your behalf. I think $80 million is not much for Meta to pay. Just in a few seconds, can you answer whether you agree with that?
Monsieur Fortin, I agree that we should have news content on our platforms. We would love to have news content on our platforms, including from news outlets in Quebec. We had private deals worth in excess of $20 million with private news outlets. We would love to have that content back on our platforms. We can't do it within the very restrictive framework that C18 presents. So if we are scoped out of C18, or if news outlets are given the option to opt in or opt out of C18, we would love to put them back on our platforms. We think we have worked with news outlets in Quebec. We would love to work with them again, and we could turn that content on again tomorrow.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you.
Monsieur Boulris, Monsieur Boulris.
We will now go to Mr. Boris. Please go ahead for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses who are here with us. We are all users of your platform, like millions of people in Quebec and Canada. I think, though, we have to stand back a bit. Your companies were not built to defend democracy or to improve the quality of public debate or politics. Your job is really to make a profit. So it's not your mission really to ensure proper information, but you do have an additional responsibility that has been on the shoulders of traditional media in the past, but now it is up to your companies to have clear rules to rule out disinformation and foreign influence. But it's not your primary mission. So as elected representatives, we are concerned because you are well prepared, you know how things work in committees, you have told us about all the wonderful things that you have been doing and how much money you've spent. It's hard for us in the 5 minutes we have to evaluate all of that, but even if we say it's all true, then we are still concerned because the misinformation, disinformation is still out there. We would like to know what you intend to do to improve the situation, because there are countries like Russia that want to reinforce these divisions and discord in our society. So what are you going to do to improve the situation? That's my question.
Let me chime in here first. So Meta has the largest fact-checking network of any independent fact-checking network of any online platform. We have more than 90 independent fact-checkers in more than 60 languages who are checking information on our platforms to determine whether it is misinformation or disinformation. If they determine it is false or partly false, we label those posts, that content, or we remove it from our platforms. So my colleague, Mr. Agranovich, has talked about malicious disinformation from state actors. But disinformation or misinformation from other sources is something we send through our fact-checking network of more than 90 fact-checkers now. So in Canada, that work is done by Agence France-Presse. We are working also potentially with another Canadian partner in advance of the next election to review that information as well. So it's very much our goal to make sure that misinformation and disinformation is removed from our platforms. That said, though, we are also a platform to connect Canadians, to ensure that Canadians are able to share information, to share their views, to connect with their friends and family. And we want to do that without suppressing or limiting their ability to express themselves. So as you can imagine, Monsieur Boulris, that's a fine line. We have to make sure that we're not preventing Canadians from expressing themselves while removing misinformation at the same time.
time with your colleagues.
Sorry, I'm passionate about this
I
issue.
know, I can
Yes.
see that.
Thank you so much for the question. And first and foremost, we absolutely share your concern with respect to broad disinformation and foreign interference. We do know that this is a shared responsibility, and it's a responsibility that we absolutely take seriously, because ultimately for us, the safety of users on our platform is critical, and we absolutely believe that we play a critical role in keeping people safe online. We do have very clear and rigid policies with respect to misinformation, as well as foreign influence operations and disinformation. We have teams that apply our policies at scale 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As I mentioned earlier, we have our threat analysis group, which actively works to disrupt ongoing activity. That group also shares that information with law enforcement on the ground to ensure that we have a holistic approach across society. I would appreciate if my colleague John could weigh in perhaps a little bit on exactly what his team is doing. I recognize I have
Maybe
limited
Mr.
time.
De Heer before,
but
and
perhaps
after
if we
that,
still have
in the
time.
second round, I can come back.
No problem. Merci.
I'll actually let my colleague Justin talk a bit about our policies on mis and disinformation.
Yeah, I would chime in and echo what has been said before, but we take responsibility for protecting the integrity of our platform very seriously. And as it relates to our mission is to inspire creativity and bring joy, and divisiveness is antithetical to the community that we're trying to create. So that's why we work very hard to protect our platform with some of the most aggressive misinformation policies in the industry, where we remove any content that we identify that may be significantly harmful to our community, and we won't amplify other content that may be unverified. We also embrace a strategy of media literacy, knowing that we need to help strengthen the understanding of our community and our users to be more resilient. And like our Meta colleague mentioned, we also partner very closely with independent fact checkers and work with them to assess the veracity and accuracy of all of our content that is on the platform.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Boulris.
Start this second round. We will terminate this round with Mr. Boulris. Mr. Motz, please go ahead, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here this afternoon. I just want to follow up on some of the C-18 conversations with Meta, Ms. Curran. Does the impact of C-18 create a vacuum on your social media platform? Certainly it restricts Canadians' access to reliable news content, but does it provide a way that more disinformation or misinformation is available on those platforms?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, we would say there is lots of credible information still available on our platforms. There are academic institutions, there are government pages, there are politicians' pages. There are pages from non-governmental organizations and civic organizations. All of that information is still available on our platforms, including information from regular Canadians, which we would not characterize as misinformation either. However, look, as a Canadian, I'd love to see Canadian news back on our platforms. We'd love to have the opportunity to put it back on our platforms, and we could do that tomorrow if C-18 were repealed or if we were scoped out of that piece of legislation.
Very much. I want to, witnesses that we've had so far in this study have indicated that Russian interference is used across the political spectrum. There's no right or left. In fact, contrary to what my colleagues across the way have alluded to in the past, it's not a far-right phenomenon. And media reports, in fact, have indicated that of the 90 key accounts that promote pro-Moscow sentiments, 33% are controlled by people on the far left. So I'll ask you, YouTube officials, what does this mean from your perspective with respect to their tactics, Russians' tactics, and how you're seeing this deployed maybe in other countries?
Thank you so much for the question and for the opportunity to weigh in. I will ask my colleague John to share some of his insights here.
It's actually fair. Common to see these actors work both sides of the political spectrum. It's important not to over-index on any specific operation, because many of these operations have a counterpart that's focused on the opposing audience. I'll give you an example. The remnants of the Internet Research Agency, that was the group that was so active in 2016, the elections in the United States. they're still around, or remnants of that organization are still around. And there's a very recent operation that was sort of right facing. But prior to that, they were doing a left facing operation, or sort of left wing facing operation. So it's not uncommon to see them work both sides of the angle. The other thing I think is really important when it comes to this activity is there's just no favored version of the truth, right? The point is often to flood the zone with narratives that are often completely contradictory to each other.
Right. So thank you very much for that. I want to maybe ask across the platforms that are here. There seems to be a tone potentially that rather than taking responsibility for their role in dealing with foreign interference, that it would be easy for government to point the fingers at the social media platforms that they're solely responsible to make sure that no foreign interference, no disinformation or misinformation is ever available to the Canadian public. Now, having said that, what do you think governments should do? And it was alluded to just recently about misinformation or disinformation campaigns, so they don't reach Canadians without interfering with their right to expression. And is there things that government can do to work with social media platforms to ensure that the right of expression is still upheld, but we do some work to prevent the dis and misinformation? I'll start with Meta.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague David Agranovich, who can talk about the work that we have done with governments elsewhere, and I'm happy to chime in with the work we've done with the Canadian government as well.
Thank you for the question, and maybe I'd break my answer to 3 key points. The first is, the more that we aggressively enforce on networks on our platforms, the more we see them nebulized, both across the internet and increasingly rely on tactics that look more like Cold War-style traditional espionage tradecraft. And the people who have the best visibility into that activity are often government or law enforcement organizations. We welcome information sharing from security organizations that might have better insight into nation-state intelligence services or their proxies, so that we can then use that information to key our own investigations on our own platforms. Second, we're very careful in our own public disclosures, both to avoid speculating about the potential for influence activity and to make sure that we're reporting critically about the effectiveness of those operations. We see, for example, a Russian network known as Doppelganger, which has been the focus of quite a bit of public reporting recently. Very focused, less so maybe even on reaching real people and more so on making themselves look like they're really good at reaching real people, right? Oftentimes these organizations are selling a story to their bosses or their funders as much as they might be trying to sell a story to their targets. And so governments, in partnership, I think, with us, civil society organizations and media, we can be really careful about how we talk about these efforts, not to make, for example, Russia to sound as all-powerful as they'd like us to think that they are. And then third, there are, I think, concrete tools that governments have that could meaningfully make these operations more difficult. One of those is the fact that governments can levy geopolitical power, whether that's diplomatic sanctions, financial sanctions, or things like information sharing, like we saw with the Tenet indictment, that can then enable other actors to take action. The second would be, we've noted, for example, influence networks increasingly rely on off-platform web domains. So just websites that we certainly can't take down, even if we try to block them, but the content then persists across the internet. We published a report last year with some concrete recommendations for governments thinking about.
There.
Sure.
Thank you. We go now to Ms. Zaid. Ms. Zaid, go ahead, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for appearing before the committee. For my first question, I would like to have answers from all the 3 witnesses, and I would appreciate a verbal answer. Did any witness here today discuss their testimony with any members of this committee or the staff before this meeting? I would like to start with Ms. Curran.
No, we did not.
We reached out to all members of the committee to offer any questions or answers in advance of our testimony today.
You shared your testimony with all members?
We did not share our testimony, but we did reach out, including to yourself.
We did not.
Okay. Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Diar from TikTok. In 2023, ByteDance reported approximately 120 billion US dollars in revenue. How much of this revenue was reinvested back into your teams working on clearing your sites of misinformation and disinformation?
I don't have an exact figure, but perhaps my colleague Justin can speak a bit about how we address mis and disinformation.
Sure. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for the question. I just want to first underscore how invested we are in keeping the platform safe. And this year alone, we're investing over $2 billion on trust and safety. And in particular, we have several teams working on misinformation and covert influence. And make that a top priority for us. We've been working in this space across 150 elections around the world over the last 4 years, and continue to invest more resources and strengthen each election that we have. And as I said earlier, we basically take a three-part approach around protecting our community through removing content, empowering our community through user literacy campaigns, partnering with experts, and in working closely with independent fact checkers who help assess the veracity of our work, of the content on the platform.
Thank you. My next question is also for you. We know that inflammatory material generates more engagement, and more engagement leads to more ad revenues. Is it fair to say that your platform benefits financially when and if you allow the dissemination of mis and disinformation on your platforms?
I would disagree with that statement. TikTok, Justin mentioned earlier, our goal is to create a place for creativity and joy, and people come to TikTok for authentic content and engaging content, but positively engaging content. And when you spend time on TikTok, if you engage positively with a video, whether you watch the whole video, comment on it, like it, share it, that gives us a signal of the type of content that you may like. And that's what people, when I talk to people, that's what they come to TikTok for. I'm sure in Scarborough, you heard earlier this year when Keith Lee came to a number of restaurants there. He's an American food TikTok creator, and there were lineups around the block to go to these restaurants. There was a shawarma restaurant, there was a jerk restaurant, and like that was the biggest thing over the summer on TikTok in Toronto, and that's the type of experience that we really try to cultivate.
Chair, I would share my rest of my time with Mr. Gail.
Chair, just how much time do I have left?
Go ahead.
How much time do I have left, Chair?
You have a minute and a half.
Okay. No, Chair, I wish I was in the room so I could have a longer conversation with Ms. Coran afterward. I can't believe some of the testimony that I've heard today. As a generation that was really en masse, I've seen the effects of Facebook and other social media on my generation. Ms. Coran, did you just say that there are 90 fact checkers for your platform, a platform with hundreds of millions of users, that's probably in the billions, and a platform that's available in every single language? You have 90 fact checkers in 60 languages. So what you're saying is there's like a fact checker and a half on average for every language that you're fact checking. Do you have a statistic on how many posts are being produced on your platform per minute? And do you think that 90 fact checkers is an adequate number for that, to check that many posts?
Yeah, I will get back to the committee with an answer on posts per minute. I don't have that answer now. We have more than 90 independent fact checkers checking content on our platforms in 60 different languages. Yeah, those are the numbers currently.
I'm very scared by that statistic. 90 fact checkers for I don't know how many hundreds of millions of users in every single country in the world practically. How many posts are being produced a minute? That's a very scary thought as to the state of misinformation and disinformation around the world.
Sorry, I should clarify. That's not 90 individuals. That's 90 different organizations doing fact-checking in more than 60 languages. So, for instance, in Canada, we have Agence France Presse. We have had the Canadian Press previously doing fact-checking in Canada. So that's more than 90 organizations. That's not individuals.
Sorry, I have very limited time. Could you provide the committee with a number of maybe how many individuals, not the organizations, but how many individuals are actually checking these facts? So there might be multiple individuals per organization. The other thing that I wanted to focus on was that your organization made $134 billion last year. It was up from $119 billion the year from before. And what you just told the committee is that you'd rather save
Mr.
Facebook
Ganir, I
Meta.
got to cut you off there. Sorry.
Sure, I need like 30 more seconds to make the point.
So, on y va maintenant, Monsieur Fortin.
We'll now go back to Mr. Fortin for 2.5 minutes, please. My question will be for Mr. Deir. You have paid a lot of money in advertising. We've got Tenet Media, which has certainly put up a lot on TikTok. But how much money did Tenet Media make through its advertising on TikTok? Do you have any numbers for me?
Have a figure on that, or whether they were advertising. I'm happy to follow up with you and look into that. As we mentioned in my opening statement, we did remove the Tenet Media account from TikTok following the U.S. Department of Justice allegations.
Est-ce que de votre propre chef,
have you or TikTok, do you have plans to undertake investigations? You said that the U.S. took action and then you closed the account, but do you undertake your own investigations?
Perhaps I can let Justin talk a bit about how we investigate covert influence on the platform.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, thanks for the question. It's one that we feel is a topic we invest a lot in. We have several dedicated teams who work on this area, and they are always proactively seeking to detect and remove networks and deceptive accounts like Tenet Media.
Monsieur
We
Rick,
have
désolé,
several
il reste quelques
internal
secondes, mais
intelligence.
si vous faites cette enquête-là, comment expliquez-vous?
I only have a few seconds left. So you need the U.S. to take action before you do. So why is that?
No, I would certainly not say that's the case. We have many internal investigations ongoing, and we take action without external intelligence, but we also leverage multiple sources of external intelligence, both with our vendors and third parties, as well as leveraging government investigations. As soon as we learned of the DOJ investigation, we launched a further exploration into Tenet Media, as we can't directly adopt the conclusion of any government and need to explore our own on-platform evidence. Once we identified that, we promptly took action and removed both Tenet Media and its founder.
Merci, monsieur.
For a violation of both deceptive actor policies and paid political promotion, both which are clear violations of our community guidelines.
Thank you, Monsieur Rich, et merci à tous les témoins.
Thank you to all the witnesses.
On va maintenant à Monsieur Boulay.
We will now go to Mr. Boulouris for the second round. You have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to be very frank with you. The last round of answers to my questions was unsatisfactory. So I want to know and ask what you were planning to do to improve the situation, and you told me generally what you had done up to this point. I want to also talk about another issue. We've talked about disinformation, misinformation, but there's also the echo chamber where people just repeat and repeat information that is sometimes false. Sometimes there are algorithms that actually promote that because they intend to increase interaction, but there are people that are very anti-science and so on, and it makes public debate very much more difficult. So I would like to hear your views on how to counter that.
Perhaps for TikTok, I can let Justin talk about how we address unverified information.
Thanks, Steve. So we take the information integrity ecosystem very seriously. And as I've spoken to you about some of our policies before that we remove, but we also embrace media literacy and labeling, where we, for content that we don't fully remove off the platform, but may be unverified or inconclusive, we will provide a label so that the user has a better sense of the full context, and we won't amplify it on the feed to make sure that we are restricting the reach of unverified accounts. And more generally, we also offer additional content, such as we have a STEM feed in some markets where we're rolling out to help lift up content that we consider nutritious or informative.
Je ne sais pas si une des deux témoins, YouTube ou Meta, veut intervenir là-dessus.
I wonder if one of the other two witnesses would like to speak.
Sure, I'm happy to weigh in here. I would say that just as it relates to YouTube, we take an approach that's, similar to others, but specifically for us, our recommendation systems actually raise authoritative and high-quality information and reduce the spread of low-quality information. So we view our recommendation systems as one of our most effective lines of defense in combating misinformation and preventing exactly the spread that you've referenced. We as well, removing the content at source is really critical to making sure that we stop the spread. So that's obviously where our community guidelines would come into place, as well as our content moderation policies that we do at scale as well.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you.
This panel to a close.
Chair.
Mr. Moss.
I have a suggestion which I hope the committee will agree with, just based on the testimony that we've heard today. And in particular, Ms. Curran's comments about not sharing Canadian news, but the fact that Tenet is still being shared on Facebook via Rumble, which I find really disturbing, that Tenet is still getting the information out and the disinformation, Russian disinformation is still getting to Canadians.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Are we going to be permitted to debate this? It's just going on for a while. I just want to make sure we can respond.
I would like to invite these three witnesses back for another hour so that we have more time with them, is what I was suggesting. So with the agreement from the committee that the clerk invites these three witnesses back for an hour.
So do we have the agreement of the committee? Ms. Dancho, briefly, please.
I suggest we discuss it in subcommittee because there's a lot of different witnesses I think we can bring back. But I'm happy to discuss it in subcommittee or openly, but on its own time.
So I'm taking that Mr. Moff has moved a motion. Is the committee in agreement with this motion?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. If she hadn't given adequate notice for the motion, she'd have to have UC, wouldn't she, to move it?
No, this relates directly to, to the matter at hand.
We'll need it in both official languages as well then?
So that the motion is to invite these witnesses back for another hour, right? So
well,
does the committee
how many times are they going to do this?
Does the committee wish to support this motion? All in favor? All opposed? So the motion is carried. We will invite the witnesses back. We thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your testimony. Obviously, we want you back, and so the clerk will be in touch when we figure out a time for that. So thank you very much for your appearance today. Thank you all for your valuable contributions to this study. So with that, we are.